navigate various disability-related issues in higher education settings. So I want to thank them for joining us, and I will turn it over to them.
Thanks so much, Roxy. Thanks everybody for being here. We're hoping that we can help answer some questions and provide a forum for discussion as we all navigate this very uncertain return to school for the fall of 2020. Alicia has the PowerPoint presentation. She'll share her screen. My hope is that this works.
There you go.
All right, terrific.
Get it into the correct. All right. Thumbs up if that looks good to everybody. All right, great.
Put it in slideshow mode, Alicia. We still see sort of the whole thing.
How do I do that?
Just do slideshow and then start maybe.
Huh. If I do this, that doesn't help?
Nope.
Let's just try it back from the beginning. How's that?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
We may as well just get started. So, you know, our contact information is here on the front. This slide deck will be shared, by the way. I just saw that chat pop up in the box. We'll be sure to provide Roxy and Sandy with a copy of this to put up on the SpEdPAC website. Okay, next slide, please. This is not working, Alicia. We're still stuck on the front.
Okay, so I'm able to toggle through.
Yeah, your screen sharing is not working.
All right, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to retry it. I apologize, everybody, for the. Let's try this one more time.
No, this isn't working. Let me just share it, Alicia. All right. All right, is that looking good to everybody?
That looks good to me.
Okay, terrific. So the goals of this presentation are to review the current guidance and also to discuss best practices to navigate special education services in this ever-changing environment. So I wanted to just summarize the current guidance just so that we're all working with the same information. We certainly don't want to spend the entire evening summarizing this since this is all available in writing in various places across BPS's website as well as DESE's, but it's really helpful to get a baseline here. So in particular, with respect to the return to school, students with disabilities, especially preschool students and students with significant and complex needs should be prioritized for in-person instruction, even if others in the district are in a remote or hybrid mode. So given that BPS has not yet made a final decision on whether or not the entire district is going to start remote or in a hybrid mode, this is worth knowing. And the significant and complex needs that's in quotations here includes anybody who is designated as high need on their IEP, anybody with adaptive or alternative communication needs, homeless students, students living in foster or congregate care, English language learners, and those for whom remote services are not feasible. And it's that last category that's obviously sort of subject to interpretation, and something that we can talk about in a little while. In addition, parents can choose remote instruction for any reason. You do not have to have a doctor's note. You do not have to be at medical risk necessarily for the coronavirus. You can choose remote instruction for any reason. And regardless of where any specific child on an IEP is, whether that's in a hybrid model, whether that's in, you know, a full day, full week model, or whether that is in a remote model, the district is responsible for providing FAPE, which stands for Free Appropriate Public Education, in the environment. So essentially, a student's special education rights are intact, even during this very uncertain time. DESE has instructed districts to provide services and instruction as opposed to this resources and supports model that was deemed adequate in the spring. So what that means is that in remote instruction, whether that's the remote component of a hybrid model or whether that is the remote model, the remote by choice model across all 5 school days, is going to look a lot more robust as compared with the spring semester. So the BPS reopening plan, this is on page 28. BPS has indicated that students who receive special services, either English language services or special education, or again, this is a catch-all, who are identified by student support teams as needing additional in-person learning, may be able to choose 3 or 4 days of on-campus learning. So from what we understand from those we've talked to in the district in recent days, this calculation is likely still occurring. It sounds to me, and it may be that, that the BPS folks on this chat or on this Zoom can clarify later on in their presentation, that BPS is first assessing how many students across the district will be accessing a hybrid model and will then be making decisions about which students on IEPs to offer those additional, you know, the 3rd day, the 4th day of in-person learning to along the way. Again, I don't know that that's what's happening, but it seems as though the district is asking questions about hybrid versus remote, but is not yet doing that, reaching out to special education students and their families. So one big question about how all of this is going to work is how on earth is all of this going to work, right? And it's important at this point to distinguish between 2 separate types of plans, right? First, we have a student's IEP. That IEP should be drafted without regard to COVID-19, right? We're all in person 5 days a week. We are delivering special education services as usual, and we are not worried about hybrid, remote, shutting down, none of this. The IEP should therefore be a document that can apply to an entire school year, even if we return to full in-person instruction. Similarly, the timelines associated with IEPs, annual reviews, meetings to review independent evaluation reports, 3-year of reevaluations, any kind of timelines set out in federal or state law continue to apply. Similarly, stay put also applies. So if you get an IEP during this period that represents a significant cutback in your services, you have the ability to assert your stay put rights and continue that previous level of services. And again, this right applies with coronavirus, without coronavirus. This is a special education right that is yours per federal and state law. And finally, with respect to the IEP itself, parental consent is required to implement that IEP. BPS cannot implement your IEP unless you consent to it. And that is in contrast to what we're calling an implementation plan. This is from, this initial bullet here on the right is from DESE's guidance to districts, basically instructing districts to contact parents to discuss how this IEP that was drafted without regard to coronavirus will be implemented, if it'll be implemented in a different way than as described, right? And they direct districts to give particular consideration to potential changes to how and where special education services will be provided. And on this plan, this implementation plan, parental consent is not required for Boston to deliver this sort of change in instruction. Again, it does not change your rights to go back to your service delivery grid. It does not change your right to receive a free appropriate public education. But for administrative purposes, Boston has to be able to change the plan and deliver that without seeking parental consent. That said, they do have to communicate this plan to parents, right? It is absolutely critical that parents, district personnel, teachers, and students themselves have an understanding of how the fall is going to look for them. And again, it doesn't sound like BPS is at this point yet in the planning, but requesting this plan in writing before the first day of school will be really important to give you and the district common information about what they will be doing to service your student. So there are obviously a number of considerations when you're thinking about implementing special education plans in either a hybrid or a remote setting. I wrote here at the top, this is a non-exhaustive list because there are obviously hundreds of these considerations and they will vary significantly student to student. But these are a couple of the things that we want to be considering when we're thinking about a hybrid or remote setting. You know, one thing that's been coming up in our discussions with families in the last few weeks is if my student is in school 2 days a week or 3 days a week, will all of their pullout services be delivered during those 2 or 3 days a week? And if so, that really limits their teaching time, that limits their time in the classroom, particularly for students in an inclusion setting. It's worth having this conversation with your team chair about whether you would like to have pull-out services or secret services delivered on the remote days, right? If there are remote days in your students' plan to allow them to attend with their class or their cohort for a longer period of time on those in-person days.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt 1 second?
Yes.
There's a lot of people asking about interpretation in the chat, so I just want to make sure people...
Let's get that settled, yes, before we go.
So for everyone that doesn't know how, if you see a little button at the bottom that says English, if you tap that, you will see all the other rooms that are available. If you need Portuguese or Cape Verdean translation, please click on the room that says Portuguese. If you need Cantonese translation, click on Chinese. If you need Mandarin translation, click on German. If you need Somali translation, click on French. Spanish is Spanish.
Para aquellas personas que necesiten español, tienen que apretar el botón en español. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
I'm
you.
going to ask the speakers, please, to slow down a little bit. I am a very experienced English interpreter. The speed at which you guys are talking makes it very difficult for the interpreters to keep up. So if you guys could slow down for accuracy and completeness, it will be very much appreciated for myself.
Thank you for stating that, Juan. And the last one to join was the Amharic language that is going to be assigned to Korean. If any of the interpreters want to announce, because I see a few people in the audience that are asking. So if you want to just clarify that so we can continue.
To clarify what, I'm sorry?
Sorry, any other interpreter want to say it in their language, what room to join you in.
qofkii raba inuu Soomaali maaragtay loo turjumo qolka Frenchka ha aado. If anybody wants to interpret as
they have
Somali,
to go to the globe,
you can look to the French
to look for the globe and select the language, which some of them do not know. En español, busquen el globo en la parte de abajo de la pantalla y seleccionen el idioma español.
Someone's asking for Portuguese. Can the Cape Verdean translator please speak up?
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Are we ready to go, or we still have questions about interpretation?
You can continue. We'll handle it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, terrific.
Please slow down a little bit, ma'am. It's very
Okay.
difficult to keep up with the
So,
speed at which you're talking. Thank you.
Another consideration in the hybrid model is how to ensure that peer groupings are appropriate. If we only have half of the alphabet, say, attending school on any particular day. There's also a question of ensuring space for additional in-person days as needed for students with special needs or students with English language learning needs. The BPS plan has said that students would be offered that third day, that fourth day of in-person instruction subject to space availability. And there's a question of what happens if there's no space, right? We'll talk a little bit about this later, but it comes to a question of what does a free appropriate public education constitute for your student? And does the difference between in-person instruction and remote instruction affect whether the education is appropriate? And that's a very thorny question, something to be discussed in depth on an individual basis. We'll talk about that a little bit. There's also a question about servicing students who are quote unquote services only, say who attend school at a parochial school or another private school and receive speech language services or physical therapy services in the Boston public schools. Those students also continue to have a right to a free appropriate public education. So you continue to have the right to your services provided in some way, shape, or form. In the hybrid model with students in the district, or students in the buildings, excuse me.
喂，
There's also concern with
聽唔聽到啊？
discipline for
你聽唔聽到我講嘢啊？
masking, social distancing, hand washing, etc. Alicia's going to cover discipline in a little while, but that's certainly something that DESE has been speaking loud and clearly about since the spring. And for the remote cohort, there's a question of how are we going to ensure sort of social emotional progress particularly, but progress towards IEP goals in generally is dependent on having a cohort of peers working together. And all of our teachers I know have been working very, very hard at increasing their facility with the remote platform, but it's still not anything any of us are used to, students, parents, or teachers. And so there is a real question of when a student is completely remote, how do we ensure progress towards their goals? And how do we deliver those B-grid services, those services that are, push in special education support into the general education environment, for example? It's a little bit difficult to think that through, and that's something that school teams and parents should be thinking through as well. And then for any student that is learning from home at any point, which sounds like it will be 100% or close to 100% at least of BPS students, even if it's only one day per week, there's also a question of the availability of devices and internet connections. And I know that the district did a lot of work on that in the spring. Surely there's work to do in the fall, particularly for students new to the district, whether those are entering kindergartners, pre-kindergartners, or students new to the district at other levels. There are going to be two really critical components to this fall. One is communication. It's in the DESE plans that districts need to be communicating with parents. They need to be seeking input from parents. They need to be making sure that parents understand what the plan is. These plans need to be communicated in a family's primary language. There also needs to be communication from parents to districts, right? You as families have seen your students as learners for the past 5 months in ways that most of us do not ever get to see our students learn. And so DESE has instructed the district to really listen to families and caregivers about what challenges.
Sorry, just a reminder to slow down, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry. To make sure that families and caregivers are listened to in regards to how students have been doing, challenges that students have been having, and even areas of success that cropped up for many students with the remote environment. And how can we work together and make sure that those students get what they need going forward? This communication should be ongoing. It should not be one phone call or one meeting at the beginning of the year. It should be frequent. And it should be formal and informal. Check-in phone call, team meeting, emails, letters, and it's always good to have this communication happen in writing, since that ensures that there's no confusion later on about what somebody said on the phone or in a meeting. There's also going to need to be a lot of documentation, not only of this communication, but also of the particular plan that the district is proposing for the student, the parent feedback on the plan. If this plan does not seem to meet your student's needs, you should certainly speak up about that and have a conversation with your team chair about the plan and any changes to the plan that may be necessary. Districts are supposed to be reporting on progress throughout the year, just as they would normally. And parents should be, again, communicating any concerns with the district so that everybody is, again, on the same page about a student's progress and status. Just a note on evaluations. Outside evaluators have been up and running for a little bit of time now. They are doing some virtual telehealth evaluations. Some people are doing evaluations outdoors.
聽唔聽到我？
People have the plexiglass barriers up to make sure that everybody is safe. Folks are doing some benchmark testing to see where kids are relative to where they were maybe in January or February.
Can you hear me?
It's not clear yet what the school-based
聽唔聽到我講嘢啊？
will look like. DESE has directed districts to figure out how to do these telehealth or remote evaluations. There's some evaluations going on this summer, districts trying to address this backlog that they have. And again, timelines are in effect. It is virtually impossible for any district in the state to meet that 30 or 45-day timeline for an evaluation at this point, but they have been tasked with dealing with this backlog to make sure that kids get their evaluations in a timely manner. And compensatory services, we'll talk more about compensatory services later on, but compensatory services may be appropriate for those who have had to wait for an evaluation. And so I just a note on observations. I'm not going to read this whole observation law, but you can see down here in the bottom, it is in Mass General Laws, Chapter 71B, Section 3. Parents of students on IEPs have the right to observe the proposed or current program for their students, subject to a few exceptions. And they also have the right to send in somebody else on their behalf. A neuropsychologist, for example, or a behaviorist. And whoever's making yellow lines, if you could stop, that's, it's sort of covering up the text. Thank you. So this observation law is something that has been on the books for some time now. And the ability to observe a student's in-school placement tends to be an important piece of parents having the information they need to assess whether a program is important. However, per the BPS reopening plan and also the reopening plans in other districts, this is not unique to BPS, the district is really limiting who can enter school buildings. This is for COVID-related reasons. We all agree that we want to keep kids safe, but conversations about how our parents and their designees going to be observing special education programs need to be discussed at the school level and the team level so that parents have the means that they need to evaluate their students' program. And now we're going to talk about compensatory services. I will turn this over to Alicia.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you everybody for bearing with us through the technical difficulties a little bit earlier. I will try and keep this brief so that we have plenty of time for questions, but I'll also try and take this slowly for the interpreters who are doing very hard work here. So thank you. So we had new guidance that came out earlier this week that deals with compensatory services. Generally speaking, as you may already be aware, compensatory services are services which students are entitled to. Has been a violation of their IEP such that services had not been delivered, and then you are entitled to make up those services. So when we talk about compensatory services, we're talking about essentially kind of make up services. And obviously during the school closure period from the spring, many students missed services. So the question has become, what about those services, and what is the school district obligated to provide to those students who missed services? And DESE, the state educational agency, has released guidance that has put kind of compensatory services into 3 different categories. And we have some new terminology that we are working with that we haven't quite heard before, although the concepts are the same. And so this first category of services is general education recovery support. So we refer to this as recovery support services. And these services are available to students with disabilities as well as
servicios de la educación especial. Son servicios que todos los estudiantes necesitan, servicios para poder lidiar con la parte emocional, la parte educativa. Esto no es algo que tiene que ir directamente al equipo, los servicios que tienen que ser ofrecidos.
这种服务呢，就是提供给有个人教计划的学生，在上个学期呢，就是由那补充没有得到的个人教育计划的服务，那就是根据每一个学生的情况来定。我们所说的这个个人教育计划的，一般都是一个小组一起来做计划。我们也许
establece para determinados estudiantes.
都有
12月15號係 deadline。譬如有乜嘢意見啊、complain 啊，就喺12月。
About the receipt of these compensatory services, and you're going to have to file a claim with.
那就是如果你要抱怨的话，有一。
Might be periods of time in which students are missing more services.
而且也特别考虑到
La próxima.
Jarobe, Mr. Mouth Corner, message you like.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of kind of the analysis of what a student is entitled to, this is not necessarily going to be a one-to-one correspondence to missed IEP services. So in terms of, just for example, if a student's entitled to 3 times 30 minutes a week of a certain service, and that student had missed that service for the entire school closure period in the spring, that's not to say that the student is going to be entitled to that same frequency of services under the CCS analysis. And just another point about who might be entitled to CCS services. We already talked about just the students that are on IEPs, but also students for who, the initial eligibility discussion was delayed. Students who are in out-of-district placements. I know there had been some questions about that we had received prior. That's a discussion that will happen at the team level, even though a student might be in an out-of-district placement. And that students who turn 22 during this period of time may also be entitled to CCS services. So even if they have technically aged out of special education, there will still be a discussion about their entitlement to services. And DESE outlays a number of considerations, and these are helpful in guiding what a team is going to consider when making a determination about entitlement to compensatory services. And so the first thing, which we sort of touched on already, is are there services in the student's IEP that were not offered or that the student was not able to access when in-person education was suspended. Another question deals with regression. So did the student demonstrate regression? The third thing is whether the student has failed to make effective progress. So there's a difference between whether a student is demonstrating regression as opposed to failing to make effective progress. But even for those students who did not regress, if they did not make progress, that's still a relevant consideration for compensatory services. The next consideration is whether the district has available general education recovery support services. So those services I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, those are services that are available to all students. And so those those services might include academic services, but they might also include some non-academic services as well. And to the extent that the district is offering those and students can avail themselves of those, that's something too that might bear on the analysis of what compensatory services a student is entitled to. And then so after that determination is made, okay, a student is entitled to the compensatory services, kind of what is necessary to address their special education needs. So really figuring out in detail what those services will look like. The next category is a discipline and truancy. So we had a few questions. About what should happen if a student is unable to tolerate a face mask or maintain social distancing, and this is contemplated as well in guidance throughout that DESE has put out, and districts are encouraged to develop positive behavior supports and create safe learning environments. And so DESE encourages the districts, and I think that the districts are very well aware that this has been a very difficult time for students, and for some special needs students in particular. And there should be plans for re-entry. This is not something that a student should necessarily just show up on day one. There should be communication between the district and the parent. It should be a very cooperative process. Staff might be teaching strategies that are directly related to the pandemic itself. So, strategies about social distancing, about how you tolerate a mask, things along those lines. And then DESE also flagged that there's a possibility for de-escalation or trauma-related training for staff. Disciplinary action should be used as a last resort. So if a student is not wearing that mask and otherwise, should be or is not maintaining a social distance, they're really going to consider kind of the cause of that behavior, and is this something that's related to the student's disability? And so that is something that is contemplated, and it is emphasized that this should be a last resort. For truancy, so this was another concern that was flagged by some parents, dealing with a student who might not be logging in for their Zoom sessions for one reason or another. What's kind of the implication of that? And we should be aware that the remote learning
እና በሪሞት በኮምፒውተር የሚነጋገሩ ከሆነ ትራክ ስለሚደረጉ
por alguna razón los padres deben comunicarse con el distrito y dejarles saber a ellos que no está funcionando esta parte remota, tienen que documentarlo por escrito. Posiblemente la situación no se ha desarrollado, puede haber empeorado. Si los estudiantes se están registrando en las clases, no están teniendo acceso remoto, no lo están pudiendo hacer de alguna forma, tendrá que investigarse. Se espera que algunas de estas situaciones se puedan disminuir con un poco de comunicación. Lo importante acá es comunicarse directamente con los padres, que les puedan concretar y llevar un registro por escrito de cuáles son las razones por las cuales no se están pudiendo conectar. Varios puntos respecto a cómo se van a hacer cumplir cuál es el proceso jurídico de resolución de disputa de todas estas acciones, la parte jurídica, la parte legal. Las cosas están, el ISBSIE es el recurso de apelación que ellos tienen. La resolución de la conducta de disputa se van a tener procedimientos virtuales, hasta que se sepa. Las cosas van a estar disponibles, abiertos, y los casos, en caso de que se tenga que presentar un caso formal de una disputa, simplemente porque las cosas se han cerrado o que estas entidades están operando de una forma remota. Una vez que se hace una solicitud o una queja formal, hay oficiales de las audiencias que sin que no hay ningún problema posponer una audiencia por una razón determinada. Pero ha habido situaciones en que los padres están pidiendo posponer el caso, pero a veces no presentan la suficiente razón los padres, y los oficiales de las personas de aprobación dicen no hay ninguna razón para aplazar la audiencia que se está teniendo. Cada caso es diferente. Esta es una lista de todos los recursos que están disponibles, las páginas web que se tienen de ESI, tiene toda la información, el document information que se tiene acá de bienvenida. Ustedes lo pueden ver, todos los recursos que se tienen disponibles, todas las guías que se tienen también. Y entonces, prácticamente, esa era la presentación formal que ellos tenían para ustedes. Ahora vamos a entrar ya en la parte de las preguntas. Y te parece que tienen una pregunta. Están preguntándole ahí, a ver si tienen una pregunta ahí. Yo quiero decirle hola a todos. Yo soy el asistente del superintendente de la educación especial. Quiero agradecer a todas las personas que son en presentación. Es muy importante asegurarnos de dónde estamos en esta situación y cómo estamos entrando a este proceso que realmente es bastante desafiante para todas las familias. Vamos a estar todos juntos trabajando en esto. A medida que nosotros vamos a continuar trabajando con ellos, son un excelente.
Thank you so much, and happy to be here. And I think most important thing is to hear from all your questions. So I'll turn it back over to Sandy and SpEdPAC for that.
Okay, thank you. We'll just start going into questions. There was one pre-submitted question, so I'm going to read that now, and then we can take a hand raised. So the pre-submitted question, I don't know if the parent wants her name known, so I'll just ask the question and I will try to summarize this. So the question is, what are the metrics being used to determine which of the children most affected by this situation? What's the metrics being used to figure out who the most affected are, and then add in to those that are most cognitively affected that they cannot engage with Zoom, even one-on-one, like my son who has Down syndrome. How are you determining this, and when are families going to start to hear from all the support in BPS to get the process started? And then part 2 of that question is, if you're going to be able to provide in-person learning, what are you doing to find out? If you're not going to be able to provide in-person learning, what are you doing to find out of district placements for kids that have already lost months and are legally entitled to accessible education?
Sandy, is that for me, or would you like Croton Crabtree to go first? What would you prefer?
Well, the first part is what's the criteria for identifying the students. So I don't know if you want to take that one.
Sure. I mean, they spoke to that earlier, and I'm happy to speak to it as well. I think it's important to have both perspectives. I just want to make sure. Both perspectives.
Alicia or Melanie, want to chime in?
Yeah, I think the question seems to ask what the plan is from BPS's perspective. We're happy to comment on anything after that.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, you talked about the state guidance that has already been given out with regard to defining what high needs means. And so we are in the process of figuring out how much facility space we're going to have, and that's why it's important. I certainly hope that you will all respond to the email that you hopefully got yesterday with the selection form to determine, to decide whether you would like to have remote learning or in-person learning, so that we can determine how much space we have so that we are able to prioritize those high needs students. Those would likely be our students in day schools, substantially separate students, early childhood students would be our high needs students. That is defined by, just to get a little technical, it's determined in the state by the PL3 form. And so we're looking at that. This district does have some discretion in determining what that prioritization looks like. So we're working through the state guidance to do that.
So if Melanie, Alicia, not add anything else, I'm going to go to a raised hand. Silda Mello, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, I have a question about whether DESE has issued any guidance on the process of mainstream trials for, my child is in a substantially separate classroom with a goal of reentry to a gen ed classroom. Have they issued any guidance on whether that should start and how that should happen come September?
I don't believe there's any specific guidance on that point. I think we're going to start sounding like a broken record here in a minute, which is to say this is a discussion that you should be having with your school team and that your school team should be initiating with you as well. When it comes to extended evaluations, any kind of milieu-based evaluation like a functional behavior assessment, when it comes to spending time in one setting or another with the goal of moving towards one type of education or another. These things are incredibly individualized. They should be incredibly individualized. And that's a conversation that should be had at probably the building level to make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, and I would certainly just agree with that and add just the importance of, the communication between families and schools is going to be critical for our kids to be successful during this time. And so we are working with our coordinators and our school leaders to make sure they understand this and the importance of having these meetings that the council have talked about earlier.
Okay, I'm going all the way to the beginning of the chat. People started putting questions in at 7, so sorry if we don't get to all the chat questions, but we're going to try to do our best. So I just wanted to, someone asked if the slide deck is going to be shared, and yes, they answered that already. We will post it on our website. The next question is, it is unclear to many how students with 504 plans will be accommodated or included for in-person consideration. What guidance is there for students supported via 504 to ensure their plans are followed?
So students with 504 plans also have the right to a free appropriate public education. And so many of these sort of pieces of guidance coming from DESE apply to students on 504 plans as well.
Yeah, and again, I would just add, and I think the attorneys did a really nice job just saying, you know, this is school, and this fall is school, and we need to be implementing, and we are responsible for implementing IEPs and 504s. So if we're not doing that, all together, all of us, we need to hold each other accountable to do that. And family and community engagement will be critical to doing that.
There were hands raised a second ago, but they went away. Okay, there goes Fabian. Did you have a question, Fabian?
Hi, thank you. I just have a question. I know that you mentioned on the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned about the kids with the IEP. Is there a possible, like, you know, if they have an IEP, because now they're going to do remote, is there a way that just to change or just to format that, you know, for the kind of a remote of the services that the kids should be able to receive on that? Like, for instance, if the child's supposed to have one-on-one, and you did mention that may not be specifically they will get one-on-one, will that be able still taking place remotely to continue to have that IEP one-on-one for those services?
Yes, so the school district should make every effort to implement that IEP as written. So FAPE still attaches, and the right still exists, despite the fact that parents might have opted for a remote model.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this is that in-person services like one-to-one services, even home services, were suspended to a large or complete degree in the spring. Right. But the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has indicated to districts that they should start exploring how to provide those services at this point. So whether that is something that is listed as a home service on your IEP or something that is listed as an in-class service, but your student is remote or in a hybrid model at home a few days a week, that's a conversation with the team as to how that service is going to be provided. And again, for parents and teams, the goal needs to be a discussion about how do we provide this service, or how do we provide this student with a free, appropriate public education this school year, regardless of hybrid, remote, in-person, at home, right? We need to have a conversation about, given the public health issues that we are all facing, how do we service this student's needs? And that should be done with kind of a side plan, right? It's not the IEP, it's a different plan that you talk about with the district about how that IEP is going to be implemented.
Thank you. The reason I say that, because in the spring and summer, that her one-on-one for her services for her, especially like for Wilson, instead of having the one-on-one 45 minutes, 5 days a week, she was having 30 minutes in a small group. So I make sure that, you know, it's not being repeating like that in the fall.
Right. Right, and that's a conversation both in terms of compensatory services and in terms of ongoing services for the 2020-2021 school year that you should be having with your school team.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next question we're going to pull from the chat, and Ethan, this is directed towards you. It states that you say that BPS should contact parents ASAP to discuss implementation plans. Can someone from BPS please discuss what the timeline is for BPS. When can we expect to begin these conversations? Are you saying that the implementation plan should be in place prior to the first day of school? Ethan?
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Yes, so just seeing as we got the guidance on the compensatory services and the implementation plans as what the Director of Special Education for the state called the COVID-19 learning plans. He released a draft form today for what that should look like. There was a draft form a little while ago, but it's been substantially changed. So we are working to understand what that looks like. It looks like a good form so far, just to the point of what the council said, that we need to document how and where the services this fall may be different because of a hybrid or remote learning environment. So we will be working with our families to determine that immediately at the beginning of the year. We can't do it before the beginning of the year because we need to have our coordinators of special education back. But we will be doing it as soon as we can.
Thank you. We're gonna go to the next raised hand. Mary Jane.
Mine's more of a comment. I'm so frustrated at the lack of guidance for what children with special needs who want to choose remote learning, what kind of access to accommodations they're going to get in terms of, I mean, my child didn't get really much of the services in the spring, and then he was couldn't access BSY because he can't do Zoom, and now yet there's still no guidance about how remote learning is going to work for a child who cannot access a Zoom or any of the online learning platforms. My child has a one-to-one paraprofessional. He cannot get the one-to-one guidance he needs through a computer screen.
Mary Jane.
Yep.
Sorry, your volume is very low and the translators are trying to translate. Can you just summarize your question, please?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's lengthy. How does a child who needs hand-over-hand accommodations, physical prompting, all of that stuff, how are you planning to meet the needs of this child in a remote model? Are you saying that their home services are a possibility to be provided for children?
So just to summarize that question one more time, Mary Jane, let me know if I get this wrong. But the question is, for a student who requires a one-to-one, hand-over-hand learning, I'll expand that to services that have to be provided in very close proximity. How is that student going to be supported, and how is that student going to receive his or her services in a remote model? And again, the question, I think, I agree with you, Mary Jane, that there has not been a lot of specific guidance on that coming from the state. I think that districts across the state, from what I have seen, BPS included, are still thinking through a lot of this, given that they just submitted their plans, 5 days ago, 6 days ago. But for families, that's obviously incredibly frustrating as they try to plan for a school year that's going to be unlike any other school year. Again, I think that the building level conversations are going to be where you're going to get these answers. And these building level conversations need to be focused on how do we provide a student who has high needs, who needs one-to-one support, the services that he or she needs to access the curriculum, to make progress on those IEP goals, to make meaningful strides forward, regardless of the model that that student is in, whether that's remote, whether that's in person, whether that's hybrid. And I think it's going to require a lot of out of the box thinking, a lot of creativity on the part of educators and parents who have been with their students, not only for their entire lives, but also supervising and managing remote learning in the spring. And for districts who hopefully have done some professional development opportunities and are thinking through how we service these kids who need one-to-one support or services provided in close proximity, and who for whatever reason are in that remote model particularly.
Thank you. The next question in the chat is, who are families supposed to contact to get the written plan of what our child's IEP will look like before school starts? Ethan, can you address that, please?
There we go. Okay. Sorry, the question was who, so you should absolutely be communicate with either the coordinator of special education at your building or the school leader at your building, so that you can be sure to have these conversations as soon as possible at the beginning of the year. We are working, seeing as the guidance came out this week, we are working to get this guidance out to school leaders and teachers as soon as we can, because there are, as has been mentioned, a lot of meetings that need to happen, you know, between compensatory services meetings, COVID-19 learning plan meetings, and IEP meetings. Some of it may or may not be able to be folded together, but we do need to have those three conversations. And so, as the attorneys have said, those school building level conversations are going to be really, really important. And being creative in those meetings so that we can figure out how to make sure students get what they need is going to be really important.
Thank you. The next raised hand is Sarah.
Hi, I have 3 questions. One I've seen pop up in the chat with other people as well. One, how do you apply for a mask exemption for kids who absolutely refuse to wear masks because they're autistic or have sensory issues and such? 2, how do you request more days of school, like that 3rd and 4th day for that hybrid group C? And 3, for children whose IEPs state high need, if we do go all remote, is it possible to still get in-person services?
If you could address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sorry. So on the masks, so we're working on specific mask protocols. Right now, we do have drafts that we have spoken with teachers and school leaders about, but we do need to get them out to families as well. We know that because we want their feedback on them as well. It is a very, I think going along with the conversation about masks is also the conversation about when something does happen, as it inevitably will in some building, where there is some level of exposure. And how do we communicate with families, and what's the criteria at which we do communicate with families, say this is what happened. And we're following both CDC guidelines and Boston Public Health Commission guidelines in trying to develop that criteria. So that's really important, because we do know that there are students who the mask is really hard for, if not impossible. And so that we will need to, again, be creative and have individualized conversations about how to solve those problems, because it will be very challenging for those students, and we want to make sure they get what they need. In terms of more in-person services, I addressed this a little bit at the beginning, but we will be trying to figure out where the capacity is in our buildings, and where there is that capacity, we will be getting as many high-need students as we are able to back into the buildings for more more services. It is not something that you need to apply for. It is something that we will be determining at a district level what defines high needs according to state guidelines. And the last question was, I'm forgetting the last questions.
If the district goes all remote, will there still be the possibility for some in-person special?
Oh yes, and if you choose, actually, sorry, if we go all remote, it's unlikely we would be able to have any in-person services. But if you choose remote, we have not, that's a good question that we need to
I don't want
address.
remote. I want those in-person services.
No, I understand you want them, but we haven't figured out how to, if we can figure out how to operationalize that, if we have a remote student, how to have them come to the building. Do they go to a centralized space or do they go to the school building? What impact does that have on social distancing and COVID transmission? We have to think through those issues when we think about bringing people into the building who aren't there regularly. So, but it's a good question.
And my understanding from DESE is that students with significant learning needs, that list that I'd read off, the sort of students who are homeless, students who are living in foster care, et cetera, that those students are to be prioritized for in-person instruction, even if the whole district is remote. Obviously, health guidelines apply. Certainly, if we shut down statewide, that may be a bit of a different circumstance. But my understanding is that even in districts who are choosing all remote, Brookline, Lynn, Springfield, districts like that, that those districts are being directed to provide in-person learning opportunities for students with significant learning needs. So prospectively, it's a little bit hard to sort out, but certainly currently DESE is saying even if districts are starting all remote, they are to provide in-person learning opportunities for students on that list.
Thank you both. I'm gonna pull a question from the chat. One I'm just gonna answer where someone had asked about, do they have the choice to keep their children home? The answer is yes, you can choose fully remote, regardless if your child is very high needs, which will then allow me to jump to the next question, which is asking about, Ethan, when will families actually know what their specific child's schedule is? So if that child is if BPS is considered that child the high needs and they have the option of 4 in-person days, when will individual families actually get that specific schedule so they can then make their decisions?
Sure, thank you for that. So the first step is to figure out how much capacity we have in our buildings. When we get the responses back from this initial selection form, and then we will be able to, then we will do a follow-up selection form for our high needs students to figure out who would like to come back for those in-person services and when we're able to do that. So unfortunately, and I understand this is frustrating because I've got 3 kids of my own, I want to know what they're doing, that we do have to sequence these decisions. So, and I understand it's a challenging time, but we do want to figure out how to get our high needs students back in the building.
Okay, the next person with their hand up is Amanda Chen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. My question is, I heard you say earlier that as soon as the teachers return and school starts, that's when the timeline will resume for the IEPs. But what about students like my son? He hasn't even gotten an IEP yet because he was supposed to be evaluated back in February when he was diagnosed with autism. So we have received no services whatsoever. And I'm just wondering when school is going to start. First, I thought it was the 15th, and now I hear it might be the 21st. So when can we expect to get those services? And what if school is delayed longer? Will the services be delayed longer?
Yeah, so on the evaluations, I have a team getting testing up and running, getting assessments up and running. that we are trying to figure out how to make that happen as soon as possible. I was hopeful that we could do it before school started, but we've got some staffing issues on that. We are trying to determine whether those tests will happen at the school site, or I think more likely at this time that we have some testing centers around the city so that we can complete all the testing that has happened, so that we can get back on timelines. And we understand that we're going to have to do some sort of an investment to make this happen, and that we are not going to be able to simply ask all our current staff to just do more. So we're going to have to figure out what that staffing looks like, and working with cross-departmentally to figure that out. I would say, without a meeting, it's hard to proceed with services, and I understand how you may be in your specific case in an area where the IEP is not in place. So what are the services? So how do we know? Again, I think this is where, having those good conversations with, with the folks at BPS, and whether they're in your school building or not, wherever they may be, if it's early childhood, is really, really important.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add, in terms of students who their eligibility determination had been delayed because of the shutdown, as part of that initial meeting, when you have it after assessment, you can and should be discussing the need for compensatory services at that point, given the delay that's contemplated in DESE's guidance as well.
Thank you. Ethan, this is going towards you again. The question is related to the bus transportation. So someone said that the choice people are making now, that it's believed that it's only good to November 30th. Is another survey coming out after that? Or what is the choice made, that email that went out? How long is it effective? And can you also touch base on home services? Some of our families have IEPs that include home services. So could you speak on that also?
Yes, so let me just make sure I got it. Home services and transportation and timing. So on the timing, and I just came out of another meeting where we were talking about this, where I think at any time, I want everybody to know that at any time, a family may change their mind and go into remote learning, right? So obviously it's parent choice, and also they need to be able to, if a health issue does come up, which we certainly hope it doesn't. Number two, but going from remote into hybrid is more complicated because we have to be able to plan, one, transportation, and two, space within the building. And I think that's what the November 30th date referred to, was that if you opt for remote at the beginning, we can't get you back into hybrid until November 30th. I don't know yet when the next deadline is after that, but that's my understanding of how that works right now. In terms of home services, we understand, students who have home services, it's incredibly important to their IEP. So it's a pretty small number, but we are working to figure out how to make that happen. But again, this is a staffing issue and a COVID-19 transmission issue that we're working through on a case-by-case basis, because it is a fairly small number of students.
The next hand up is Carol Rodriguez.
Hi, good evening. I am an educator as well as a parent in a different I'm an educator in a different district. I just wanted to express my frustration of how the lack of communication has been brought to educators, because I feel that I have a lot of colleagues who haven't gotten information they need. And how are the schools going to provide additional staffing if the SpEd staff is high risk, or if there's not enough space? I'm just really concerned about, we are getting all these runaround questions, and I understand that there's not much that's known. So we can't go to our building staff because they still don't know either. So you're directing us to our principals and stuff like that. So
Hi, this is Charlie Kim. I'm a board member. I'm sorry. We're going to leave this to parents. So we're going to actually go to...
I am a parent. I'm a parent of an IEP student. He's in Boston Public. I work in a different district.
You work in a different district?
Yes.
Okay.
So cool. I am expressing my frustration, but as well as the fact that nothing is being told anywhere. I try to communicate to my BPS son's school, and no information is given.
Okay, so you're asking Kotin then, correct? You're asking BPS specifically on behalf of your son.
I'm asking BPS, and if there's not enough SpEd teachers, if they're high risk, how are they going to be supported? Is there staffing? Is there going to be substitutes? What's going to happen?
Okay, thank you. That's for Ethan.
Okay. So just on the lack of information, this is a really frustrating, challenging time. I mean, we literally got the guidance on the 3 meetings that I described earlier this week. And so we're trying to put the pieces together for how to get that to school leaders and teachers as soon as we can. But we have to get it into a format so that it will land on the ground in the right way. I hear your frustration and understand it, and we'd like to be able to get that information out as soon as we can. So when we're looking for that guidance as well. Now that it's out from the state, we will be able to pick up the speed with which we can get information out to schools. That's number one. In terms of the staffing, I agree with you. The special education staff is going to be on the forefront of this, and that's going to be a challenge. And so we want to work really closely with our special education staff to figure out how to do this right. You know, in terms of them being high risks, really worried about that, right? We need to take care of our kids and our families, and we also need to take care of our staff. And so we're figuring out ways to do that. We're talking to our, union partners to figure out what those safety levels are needed and how to handle leave of absences and all sorts of complicated issues like that. And I understand it leaves a lot up in the air and uncertain, and it can be frustrating. But we're certainly working on it, and we're working on it from the point of view of, we need to be safe. And we want our students to learn, and in particular, we want our high need students to have that opportunity to learn.
Thank you. I'm just going to say, because we want to be mindful of time, there's 8:25. I just want to let people know that everyone that has their hands in the chat questions we have, but the individuals who have their hands raised and their questions are not in the chat. We want you to feel free to please send your questions directly to Ethan and BPS, and also to see SpEdPAC on it, so we can continue to advocate and follow up for parents. We're going to be trying to take this chat, the questions we don't get to also have BPS answer them, so we can have a Q&A written document to follow up with, because we want to make sure families get the answers they're seeking and that the information you need is there. So please know that even if we don't get to you, please send those emails, and we will get those questions answered, and the ones in the chat will occur. I'm just gonna grab a chat question before the next hand raised, which state's talking about there are 35 out of the 125 buildings in BPS that have HVAC systems. Given what we know about the importance of well-ventilated buildings, how are students with disabilities able to access these 35 buildings with HVAC systems, since some students with disabilities may be in buildings for up to 4 days? or will they go back to their poorly ventilated building that may make their mask wearing super uncomfortable? So Ethan, this is a question about prioritizing those students with disability or whose families may choose in person and how buildings are going to be utilized. So could you address that?
Sure. Sure. So I guess the first thing to say, we have not had any discussions about moving kids from one school community to another because of facility issues. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I have not been part of any of those conversations yet. So that is a challenge. We understand the facility issues are a challenge around the HVAC. My understanding is that the CDC and Boston Public Health Commission guidelines are around ventilation, and that they don't necessarily, buildings don't necessarily need to have HVAC systems to meet those guidelines. The district has done a lot of work over the summer, making sure that there is a window that works in every single classroom that has windows. And furthermore, that the mayor is making a aggressive investment over the course of the fall to fix windows throughout buildings over the course of the fall. Furthermore, there have been some thousands, I don't know exactly how many, some thousands of fans ordered, so that it's not just having the window open, but it's also having fans in the windows to increase that ventilation. So I just think it's a safe building according to the guidelines, is not dependent on HVAC systems, but is about the ventilation. And there are monitoring systems that are being put in place to check to make sure they are there.
I'm going to take the next hand raised, but before I do so, I just want to know if Alicia, Melanie, and Ethan, are you fine with staying on for an additional 15 minutes to continue asking questions, answering questions?
Sure.
That's fine, yes.
Thank you. Kelsey?
Hi there, thanks so much. First, my question is really perhaps an add-on to what we were talking about earlier about basically what could be or is a complement to compensatory services. But before we even get to that, I have to say, the more I hear from families, the more I hear about, you know, our students with special needs being a priority, being deemed a priority, being told they are priority, and the high need element attached to that, I just can't help but not remark that, you know, by definition, a priority means that something else sits to the side because this is the most important feature. And so my question is two-part. One is, given the emails many of us have gotten about these two choices, you know, hybrid or remote, I cannot reconcile how a parent could make an informed decision about either one of those options, given that most of us in the SPED community, particularly with really, really fragile children and with incredibly high needs, need this in-person feature so badly that through no fault of anyone at the district, what I'm hearing back is sort of a lackluster, the opposite of a priority given. And I know it isn't meant that way, but my question related to that is, if it is indeed a priority and parents really want to know what exactly puts them in the category that would allow for in-person services that are not just the difference between an achievement gap and not, they're the difference between their child walking, talking, speaking, swallowing, you know, or not. And I just have to say that I won't be able to hit my head to the pillow tonight, because to be honest, it seems that in the email I got, the fact that there was no mention of special ed students anywhere to be found. It was as if the entire BPS community at large was being addressed, you know, kindly and warmly and with good intention, and I appreciated that. But at the same time, if we are creating a subset group of kids, who arguably need everything we have to throw at them, then we cannot give them a no mention in either of those choices. There has to be an explanation when you click A or B, remote or, or hybrid. Here's what it will mean for your SPED student if you click either of those options. And it's why I have clicked neither and have remained completely offline for months and months. So I apologize for going on and on. That my actual question related to the frustration is, how can parents make a decision given those two options, many of whom have yet to receive the question? And secondarily, there has to be, given that everyone can go and get their nails done in the state of Massachusetts right now, a complement to compensatory services offered, that for those of us who are literally tube feeding our kids or figuring out a way to get them to even hold a fork to eat while this is going on, that the idea that maybe an in-person option, even if classes don't resume, is still on the maybe table is completely unacceptable. So I'm not blaming anyone for it. I'm just raising that as that's what people are thinking at home. They are thinking, how in God's name, never mind school, if only it were that, talking about services that keep kids moving, talking, breathing, and allowing them at some point to get to school. So my question is again that about, I guess, what I would call a complement version of compensatory services. What does that look like? What could that look like? And how could that be triaged in a way that other services in our state have been? Home health aides have been dispensed. People who are in nursing homes get what they need. So I will stop now, but I with gratitude, I do need to address, it's not just frustration. People are full of complete despair. And it's an isolated group. When we hear the superintendent say, well, we hear you, people aren't so sure we are being heard, because the people you're hearing from are the people who are not changing 8-year-old diapers all day. So I just want to reiterate that as well. The people you are not hearing from are the people who we should be most concerned about. So Ethan, with great respect and thanks for your tremendous work, I would just ask about that one piece. If people are stuck at home for whatever reason, what hope do they have that a complementary version of a compensatory service will be coming their way? And who's going to tell them about it if the only thing we get from the district is, assuming your child is a gen ed student, which adds a little insult to injury, I must say. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really hear what you're saying. And I would just say that I've used the same sort of, I don't want to say sarcastic remark about getting your nails done. Like, how can we get our nails done in Massachusetts and not have kids in schools? Like, I hear the frustration loud and clear, and want to be sure that the reason I think forums like this are so important is because I want to be able to hear your perspectives and learn more, so that I and our team in the Office of Special Education are able to advocate strongly and appropriately for our students with disabilities. It is why I do this job, and it's why we all got into it. And I understand it's frustrating that students with disabilities were not mentioned in the email, and that it has to go sequentially, that it's going sequentially, as opposed to being able to say, look, we know exactly what we're doing. The course of action we've taken means that it is sequential. So we are getting the answers about capacity from all students, and then I am hopeful that you will then see the prioritization that you are talking about, because it's important that we send that message that it's really important.
Thank you, Ethan. And I do appreciate your work and efforts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've only been here a little while. Let's see how we do, right? I mean, let me keep going. But thank you.
Also, Kelsey, Kelsey, I just want to say you should check the chat box. You've got a lot of parents who feel really similarly and who have signed on to this this sort of question, this concern, this frustration, and that's what SpEdPACs are for, right? That's what gathering and talking together, sharing concerns, sharing frustrations, and coming up with a direct action plan. Talking with Ethan, you know, he's here, he's listening, and emailing from the SpEdPAC to really make sure that your kids' voices are heard. And also, you know, talking to others who can help you elevate your voice even further, I think is really critical. And I also have some hope listening to parents, talking with school leaders around the state, talking with team chairs across the state, that everybody wants to get these kids back into school. Everybody wants to do the right thing by these kids. I'm a lawyer, I fight for my profession, but some of these conversations that I've seen start up really are starting up in good faith. They're starting up later than we want them to. They're starting up in a sort of a discombobulated way. But at the same time, I think that, and I also want to say, it shouldn't be, you know, your job as parents to have to fight so hard. But the fact that you do fight so hard for your kids is what ensures that people like Ethan are able to listen and are able to hear the concerns that are coming from the school community. And so I would encourage you to continue speaking out and making your concerns known, because this is obviously critical stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize what Melanie said around these forums being so important. That's why I appreciate SpEdPAC and the board pulling this together. This is an unusual meeting for SpEdPAC to have it in August, and they went out of the way because this is so important. So really appreciate SpEdPAC and the energy they're putting in to get us to a better place. We don't always have good conversations or easy conversations, but hopefully by having conversations, we'll get to a better place for our students.
Thank you. And I'm just going to pull a couple from the chat and remind us when we're answering to just slow down a little bit for our interpreters, please. I speak fast, so I'm talking to myself too. One, and I'm merging, Ethan, this is addressed towards you. Are substantially separate classroom a definite to go back 3 to 4 days in person? Yes or no, is that a definite? And then also, how is remote learning being measured? And how are students being checked to make if they're making effective progress?
Sure.
評估㗎。
學校真正
Sí. Pero no es una...
知道家长的要求，然后来。
咁啲學生參與，你係點樣評估？ 我哋有一個日曆，會喺度處理明白學生嘅進展、進步、發展。我哋會盡量好準確咁樣嚟評估啲學生。
የልጆ ሪፖርት ሲመጣ መጥቶ በደብዳቤ ከመጣሎት እና እርስዎ ከሚያውቁት የልጆ የትምህርት መሻሻል ጋር የተያያዘ ካልሆነ ወይም የሪፖርቱ ላይ የተሰጠው ውጤት እርስዎ ከሚጠብቁት በላይ ወይም በታች ከሆነ ይህንን ጥያቄ በዲስትሪክቱ ማስታወቅ አለበት።
Hay 3 personas levantando la mano acá. Vamos a una cuestión legalmente difícil para los padres. Número 1, los servicios del IEP definen cómo se van a ofrecer los servicios, pero
Hi.
Fatuma, can you hear me?
Hadi. haddii ardaygu ay refuse gareeyo ama uu diido inuu qaato sign language ama faraha looga hadlo iskuulka marka uu joogo marka districtiga ma waxay leeyihiin inay maaragtay waa ku qasban yihiin inay sameeyaan miyaa la leeyahay oo su-aashooda ay tahay qofka ku xigaan su-aasha weydiineynaa oo gacanta taagan inaan ogaado ama la ii xaqiijiyo aniga maadaama aan habitual learner qof ka sii akhriya wax ka barta markuu wax arkaayo aragtida maaragtay wixii uu arko wax ku baranayo sidee loogu diyaarinayaa ama maaragtay baahi tirayaa baahida aan ka qabo sida qofka uu wax maaragtay markuu ka baranayo visual
the kind of the specific example I wanted to go to and kind of was hoping Alicia or Melanie could weigh in with a little bit of this is it's not just so much the measuring of progress or goals. I mean, I could use this one example. Our child has a PT goal about being able to navigate the playground structure at her school, which obviously is something that is not going to be measurable in the foreseeable future. But I'm thinking a little bit to priority with things like a peer group for reading or for speech, where she may be doing that remotely, but maybe having kids who are physically present with the teacher or provider. And how is that going to look? How is that going to manifest in terms of her being able to receive the priority of the treatment that she needs in that particular moment? And I guess the question I kind of wanted to aim at Melanie, which is building a little bit on what Jack was asking, which is what I saw in the slide deck was that we should maintain our IEP, like using, for example, the playground structure goal, which is sort of a little bit meaningless at the moment, that we should maintain it as a pre-COVID or post-COVID perspective, and that the implementation plan is where we need to address COVID-specific needs. I share Jack's same concerns about the consent issue, but I'm just trying to navigate and understand, for instance, to kind of like if we wanted our daughter to have the benefit of peer groups with speech to enable her for better language, but the reality is that the kids in masks working with her in a speech group aren't actually providing good peer modeling that she needs to progress, or how do you measure that? Is that something that we, what I'm hearing, and I just want to understand procedurally, that's not a IEP team meeting change, it's an implementation plan mechanism. Is that something that the implementation plan, is that something we could call an IEP meeting for, or how? I'm just trying to, and understand this is all, I'm trying to be patient, although that doesn't come naturally to me. But how does that look? I mean, so as some of the examples I gave you, I hope was helpful in understanding what I'm getting at, which I think a lot of parents have their own version of that.
Yes, I think that this question boils down to, how am I supposed to know whether this COVID learning plan, this implementation plan, is up to snuff at all? And what do I do as a parent if I, A, believe it's not up to snuff from the beginning, and B, if I find it to be not up to snuff in the implementation? And I think the answer there is the same thing that you would do, quite frankly, if you find that an IEP is not up to snuff along the way. You ask for a team meeting, you document, you communicate, and I think you've got due process recourse available to you if the district is not responsive and is not meeting the student's needs. Even though they don't need your consent to change this plan, they still have to give your child a free, appropriate public education. And so those conversations, it's FAPE is FAPE, right? It is necessary to provide FAPE, whether we're doing it with this implementation plan, this COVID learning plan, or whether we're doing it with an IEP during the before times, right, when we were all in school. And I hope that answers at least part of your question.
No, it definitely does, Melanie, and I appreciate that. I think all of us parents, and I think this is a little bit what Kelsey was getting at, is just, we're just grasping for something to hold on to for when we feel like, not just to advocate, but make change for our kids. I guess the one question I have on your point is, will the team have a say in the implementation plan, or are those coming from the IEP teams, just like functionally, who will be responsible for?
So can I just chime in? And I think Melanie and Alicia would probably agree that the guidance on this, there are a lot of different ways the district can handle this. Like you could have an IEP meeting for all of these things, or they've said you could have an quote unquote informal meeting that could handle some of these things, but there are some regulations that need to be in place when you have one of those informal meetings. So then it sort of seems like it's an IEP meeting. So you have to be very familiar with what's happening. But I think Melanie's right. The most important piece is that the IEP has to be implemented now, and that the conversations with families at the building level are what is most important and are going to drive the process.
I also think it's really critical to know, Courtney, that they have to talk to you about this plan, right? You should not receive an email with the remote learning plan or the implementation plan or the COVID plan or whatever calling it. You shouldn't just receive an email with that attached. Somebody should talk to you. You should talk to somebody to say, I want let's suspend this navigate playground equipment goal and let's come up with a different goal, right? That we can measure, that we can implement, and that can move my daughter along during this period of time, right? Those are the kinds of conversations that should be happening. And this plan, whatever it ends up being, should be in writing. And you should be able to look at it with your plan on one hand and your IEP on the other hand, right? And understand the relationship between these documents. And if you can't understand the relationship, the conversation has not concluded yet, right? There needs to be more work done.
Thank you. Because of the time, we're going to take the last question, but we've been putting in the contact information for SpEdPAC, and we've put in a few BPS emails. So please send in your questions. We're going to grab the whole chat and try to create a Q&A doc and send it out. This is going to be recorded and it will be on our YouTube page, which I also put in the chat. So the next question is Ingrid. You can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Hi, I'm grandma. My grandson lives with me, and I'm trying to help my daughter raise this little 4-year-old who is at the Henderson, and he is nonverbal. He had a very hard time. He started out really strong from September to March, and he was doing so much. Then COVID happened, and now he is regressing. Things happen. We're right now between a rock and a hard place because he lives with me. He lives with his great-grandmother who's in hospice care. So we can't put him in school because we're scared that he is going to get something and bring it home to grandma, bring it home to great-grandpa. But remote was just not working for him. And we doubt it very much if it's going to work for him when school starts back. So my question for Ethan is, are there any outside agencies that we can try to get to do home-based services for him in regard, because we've been trying everything for ABA services. We already got speech, but we're looking for ABA service and stuff to come in to try to help us to work with him until hopefully things clear up and everything, he can go back to school to be with his friends and to progress as he was doing before.
Yeah, I just want to say I hear thank you for doing what you're doing for your grandson, and like this is why you have these meetings, to hear the stories of like the challenge, and like when you say living with a great grandmother who's, you know, obviously medically at risk, and that's why you can't go to school, and he's struggling. It just makes it really hard. You know, there is guidance in the DESE guidance around in-home services, and we want to try and figure that out. And to sound like a dead horse, those conversations at the school level about what can be put in place are really important. And you need to explain that regression, and I mean, you talk about that regression. You don't have to explain it, but you know, have that conversation so you can come to an agreement about something that hopefully can work for your grandson, because that's what we want to do, and it's a really hard situation.
I'll also say, I just put it in the chat as well, but the Autism Insurance Resource Center is a really wonderful organization, and they can help hook you up with some home ABA services. There tend to be waiting lists, but put your name on as many different waiting lists as possible, and eventually something will come through.
I should have added that piece around, I mean, yes, the what's it called, Autism Insurance Resource Center is great. And I think one of the things we want to work to do in our office is to help families access those services more aggressively, because there are a lot of services out there, and we just have to figure out, make sure people know that they're available and how to access them. So that is something we'll be working on over the course of the fall.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank you all for coming, and our interpreters and our families. Ethan, Melanie, Alicia, thank you for answering the questions. We will, as we mentioned, have the video available shortly on our YouTube channel. Please note you can reach us at email@bostonspedpac.org. Our website, www.bostonspedpac.org, is also up there, along with our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and the voicemail for us, so that we can continue. But right now, we're going to end our session with a poll. If you have not done this too, please make sure you answer the poll and also sign in with the survey. You are all appreciated, and please know that we will work on getting that Q&A question and answer to you, and following up with everyone. So thank you all, and go ahead and answer those polls, and we're all set.
And just thank you, Roxy and SpEdPAC, for putting this meeting together. It's so important to hear all the questions and perspectives.
So we'll stop recording now, and Guys, it's 9 o'clock